Okay, so with day one of the NFL draft in the books, we're heading on to day two. I figured I'd make a little video, talk about the players who I'm still high on, my top 20 players who did not get selected in the first round, and really talk about, I think, maybe why they didn't get selected and where they could go. So we'll start off at the top. These are my top 5 that are still on the board, and the numbers you see to the left, that's where I had them just overall in my big board. And I did take positional value into account, so that's why Kellen Mond's so high, because he's a quarterback, and also I think he's really good. So I could see Mond. The tough thing for Mond is that, I was thinking the places where he could go would be like New England if they didn't draft a quarterback, or Chicago if they didn't draft a quarterback. There's not a ton of places left. Maybe he could be a New Orleans option, or maybe he's one of those, I could see San Francisco in like the third round doing what they did with Kirk Cousins, getting him, sort of later, even though they already have a quarterback. If you remember, they drafted Kyle Shanahan drafted Kirk Cousins in the same draft that he drafted RG3 when they traded a bunch of picks to get him. So could be a similar thing there. Number 11, Levi Onwuzurike. I was kind of hoping that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would select him. I feel very confident he's going to go in the second round. I think he's a really talented player. I'm surprised he's still on the board a little bit, but I knew that people were sort of a little bit lower on him than I am. Landon Dickerson, another guy who, to me, that's just injuries. People are concerned about the injuries, but I just think in the second round especially, there's too good of a reward, and the risk isn't that risky in my opinion, because more often than not, these things tend to work out in the favor of the team that drafted that player. But I also understand the counter argument of, for one thing, I'm not a doctor, and for all we know, the doctors of these teams are saying, actually, it looks a lot worse. So maybe that's cause for concern. And also, I think teams just feel like, hey, well, sure, he'll probably work out, but if he doesn't, then we're getting someone who ends up being a complete bust, whereas we'd rather take a guy who's not going to be a bust. And you might see something similar with number 14, JOK, another guy. I'm shocked he's still on the board. Out of these top 5, I thought for sure he would have been selected. Out of everyone, he's the guy who I thought was going to go. I think he's a good player. I don't really understand this. I guess maybe it's a bit of a reaction to the Isaiah Simmons of it all, where Isaiah Simmons falls out of the, he gets selected 8 and kind of has an up and down season, to say the least. He had his moments, but it wasn't ideal. So maybe that's something. He is kind of an undersized linebacker, but you know what? The history of the NFL says drafting an undersized linebacker still works. So I'm not as high on him as some other people were, but I still had him as my number 2 linebacker. I did go back and forth on him and Xavier Collins, so I don't hate that selection over him, just if you think that fits your defense better, which I think it does. But like the Jamon Davis, that was surprising to me. I don't know. Very surprised by that. And then number 16, Tyson Campbell. I suspect he'll be going around. He might fall to round 3, honestly, which he could be a steal potentially. He was my number 2 corner. I had Stokes at number 3, Campbell at number 2, and then Farley at number 1. So getting someone who is as explosive as he is, you need explosiveness to play corner, and he can be explosive. He's big, he's physical, he can cut. Keep your eye out for Tyson Campbell, absolutely. And I could see a quarterback-needy team getting kind of a steal here in the second or third round. Okay, next 5, Tyler Shelvin. I expected he wasn't going to go first round, even though I have a first round grade on him. Again, he's just the kind of guy where, in my opinion, he's this big defensive tackle. So I kind of just expect that he's someone who a lot of teams might not necessarily have a need for, but if you do have that need, he has a lot of value. So that's why I like him. And for number 20, Christian Barmore, a little surprised. I thought there was a chance he could have gone first round, but I'm not shocked. I know a lot of people aren't too high on this defensive tackle class like I am. I have 3 guys in the top 20. I might be the only person that says that. But I like Barmore a lot too. I think, you could easily flop him and Shelvin. It kind of just depends on the fit, in my opinion. They're in the same tier. So those are 2 guys I expect to be gone day 2, and I expected them to be gone. I expected Shelvin to be gone day 2 regardless. I think Barmore kind of thought he might be gone day 1, but I'm not shocked that he fell. Terrace Marshall, a little bit surprised he fell. I thought he would be a first round pick. I thought that Baltimore might get him, but they like Bateman better. I get that. So, there's already been a handful of wide receivers off the board, but he's another one that could be a steal, and this is kind of my whole point about, don't draft a wide receiver in the first round, because a guy like Marshall falls to the second round where you can get him here. So, for a team like Cincinnati, I think they might be kicking themselves a little bit if Marshall is still available with their second round pick, and they could have had Sewell and Marshall instead of Chase and whichever tackle they end up getting, which I think will be a significant downgrade from Sewell. I don't know if Marshall is that big of a downgrade from Chase. He might be. I do like Chase a lot better than Marshall, but it's, wide receiver is notoriously a difficult position to pick. So that's just my concern. You also have Jamar Johnson so he's my 26th ranked prospect. He's safety from Indiana. Smart player. Didn't run the quickest 40, so I think people might be just concerned about his speed, which I think is fair. Like, that's a real concern I have as well, which is why, despite the fact that I like everything else about his game, he has fallen this far because the speed is a real thing. And, safety, it's not the most important thing to have speed like it is with a corner, but it's still very important. And the fact that he is a little bit of a slower safety, that's going to give some people pause, which I get. And he kind of is scheme dependent, so I understand him dropping here. In fact, no safety went in the first round, so which I'm not surprised by too much. Number 27, Jabril Cox. He's another guy who I thought he was going to go in the first round, but it seemed like, I had him ahead of Jamon Davis, so I don't know, a little bit surprising to me. At one point I had Cox ahead of JOK too. Him, Collins, and JOK, all three of those guys, I was back and forth basically throughout. He's a really good coverage linebacker that I think can stop the run well enough. So I think a team could get a steal with him in the second round. And listen, LSU knows how to get linebackers that can play in the NFL. That seems to work out. Okay, next here, Elijah Molden and Andre Cisco. Those are two more safeties that I have. Molden, he's the last. So I had 11 guys with a first-round grade that did not go in the first round. Molden was barely that, 32. So, again, these two guys, not shocked to see them fall into the second or third round at all. But I think that those are guys who can be good safeties. And part of this is just positional value. A lot of people don't feel like you should draft a safety in the first round. I kind of say if they're a good safety, draft them towards the end of the first round. But, and if they're like an elite safety, then you can draft them earlier. But none of these guys, I think, are elite. So I get it. But those could be two quality starters and, day one starters, I think. Tevin Jenkins is another guy who I think a lot of people are surprised has fallen this far. I did have a second round grade on him, though, but barely. So, again, good offensive lineman. He's another player who I can see having some real impact. And then, same thing with Dylan Verdunes, who I have at 36, just a couple steps below. So we're skipping Freiermuth, but I also like Freiermuth a lot as well because Freiermuth, he would be the number one tight end in most drafts, I think. It's just that this draft there is, obviously Pitts, so he's going to go number one. But I think that Freiermuth could be, for a team that needs a tight end, he is someone who, tight ends tend to not be day one starters just in general, no matter how good they are. So maybe that's giving some people pause with the position. But if you're building for the future, he's a great guy to build with. And finally, my final five, just to be clear, this might be a little bit off just because I didn't necessarily go through and look at all these sixth round talents and say, well, what do I think about them? I really only kind of did my rankings based on me trying to figure out the top 10 players at each position. So in doing that, there are some guys that missed. For example, like Peyton Turner, I completely missed. He fell through the cracks. And, when I did my evaluations on Edge, he wasn't really talked about at all in the first couple of rounds, but then he kind of just started climbing up. So there's a little bit of that. There might be a few players that I would have had on this list if I really did a more thorough evaluation of every player, but that's not really, I don't really care that much about trying to figure out who's the 14th best edge rusher and the 15th best edge rusher, so I'm just going with this, and in doing that, some could slip through the cracks. But anyways, yeah, Brevin Jordan, really good tight end. He kind of can make explosive plays. Him and Freiermuth, I think, those are two guys who I could absolutely see in a couple of years saying, wow, that was really good value. Getting them in the second or third round, that was really good. Dyami Brown, another guy that, he's my second favorite wide receiver left on the board. So, again, another one of those guys, really good wide receiver in the second round that you can get. And if you're one of those teams that would want a wide receiver but didn't draft it, like, say, Detroit's now saying, hey, there's a couple good wide receivers, and there's a few, like Elijah Moore, who I like as well, is still on the board. He's not on this list, but I like him a lot. So he's another guy. There's so many good wide receivers. Rondell Moore, who's kind of a boomer bust guy, but he's interesting. So Dyami Brown, last receiver I have on this board, but part of that too is, again, I don't value wide receivers the same way just because there's so much of them. To round it out, we have three edge rushers, Ojulari, Osai, and Ndagabo, who they all kind of have their interesting, they're not complete, I don't think any of them are complete edge rushers, but they all have intrigue there. So I think with all three of them, there's reason to draft them, take a flyer on them, although I'm not wild about all of that. I wouldn't hate seeing any of them drop to the 3rd round, but I also wouldn't hate spending a 2nd round pick if the fit is right. So yeah, that's my top 20 still on the board. Just figured I'd make this video real quick before draft day 2 starts. So you guys can, check this out, see what I think. I know my evaluations are way different than everyone else's, but that's just because I thought it'd be more fun to not pay attention to what everyone else is saying, just do what I think and let you guys know what I think instead of focusing on like, oh, well, Mel Kiper says this. I don't care. Why are we all deciding that Mel Kiper is God, or, these guys who make mock drafts are God? A lot of them are smart. Like, I don't hate on really anybody because of how hard draft evaluation is. Lord knows I was horrible in the past, which is why I'm kind of doing it a different way now. But I just think, like, I personally think I'm probably going to be more right than the average person by doing it this way. Could be wrong, but if I'm wrong, I'll try and figure out what I did wrong and keep being weird next year, but just do it in a different way. That's kind of what I think, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, let me know in the comments below, is there any other sort of sleepers that I didn't mention that you want your team to draft, or just you think that could be a good pick, or just let me know what you think about, anything. I don't know. How's your life going? Let me know in the comments below, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.